Listen, we're not gonna waste any time doing some kinda abstract opening monologue today. This is a project that's been on my mind since way before it was announced or given a name, so I'm not gonna hold myself back from gushing. I started waiting for a Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse sequel the moment I walked out of the theater 5 years ago. It was a film that blew my 14-year-old mind back when it released, offering a movie-going experience I haven't had replicated too many times since. It was a love letter to the overarching mythos of my favorite superhero through the eyes of a character we'd never seen on film, Miles Morales, whose struggles, environment, and personality are so different from Peter Parker, yet through the film we discover are so similar at the same time. In ways, it's a deconstruction of the typical Spider-Man origin story, using the hero's various incarnations to show how many people can wear the mask and give it their own meaning. But simultaneously, it's also a great beginning for Miles that hits all the beats of a Spider-Man origin in a fashion that's completely different from any version before him. It's everything a Spider-Man film needs to be, yet there's nothing like it, and you can feel that not only in the writing, but its immaculate presentation. Up to before I watched it, I'd never seen a film that so seamlessly integrated hand-drawn and CG animation into its art direction, but once I did, I knew it was where feature animation needed to go moving forward. And from what's come out in the past few years, it's pretty clear to me that the industry agreed. Spider-Verse was a total game changer for a medium that had been so focused on getting as realistic as possible for the past 10 years, and that same level of creativity went into every other element of the film. Unrelenting passion is poured into every frame, every line, every iconic sequence. It's engaging, heart-wrenching, hilarious. There are very few films that I'd say have no real noticeable flaws, but Into the Spider-Verse is one of them. It's been my favorite film from the moment I finished it, and whenever I watch it again, I keep finding new things to appreciate it for, seeing as there are so many little details you wouldn't catch on a first, second, or fifth viewing. So you better believe when I saw that post-credit scene, I was on the edge of my seat waiting for updates. I'd go as far as to say that Across the Spider-Verse wasn't just my most anticipated movie of the year, but maybe the whole decade. And I'm not gonna lie, that hype I felt gave me incredible anxiety unlike anything I've felt before. I mean, I had total faith in Phil Lord and Chris Miller to pump out another banger. They'd been doing it non-stop for basically their entire careers, but what if they couldn't capture lightning in a bottle twice? What if it doesn't end up quite as good? And with each new piece of marketing, I kept feeling more reassured that I wouldn't be disappointed, but I could never shake that anxiety. The cynic in me wouldn't let my inhibitions go, and it followed me all the way up to the premiere. I've seen it now though, so what do I think? Whew, it's great. It's just not perfect, and I know that the film has been praised back and forth all across the board, which I want to emphasize I do not disagree with. In a second, I'm going to go into the many positives first before bringing up my issues, but I don't want to act as if Across the Spider-Verse doesn't have some problems holding it back. So please prepare yourselves. I'm going to try and soften the blow as much as I can, so you'll get that just because I'm not in love with every element, that doesn't mean I don't think it's awesome. There's honestly a ton that this film steps up from the first, building onto it in, no pun intended, amazing ways. Like for one, Miles' arc is outstandingly in touch as a progression from the original. Considering Into was all about him figuring out what it means to be Spider-Man, getting help from Gwen, Peter B, and all the others to understand that there's no guidebook beyond taking a leap of faith, representing the confidence in one's identity needed for the job, it would only make sense that the next film continues that arc. Though in this case, it's less about Miles discovering his own path, that's already done, so instead it becomes about him not wanting others to hinder or tell him he can't continue down the path he's chosen, whether it be his parents, Gwen, Miguel, or the universe itself. And in doing so, it really speaks to one of Miles' most recognizable traits among the Spider people, his unwillingness to compromise no matter the outcome. See, I won't go into spoilers since this isn't that kind of review, but to say the least, what keeps Miles from finding peace in this film is his inability to just let things happen regardless of the consequences. And that's a super consistent defining trait that's helped to characterize his Spider-Man from the beginning. It's always directly tied into who he is as a person, setting him apart from the others. And the fact it causes one of the major conflicts in the film is so in line with the meta-commentary it goes for, you can't even imagine. Plus, it can't be understated how well Miguel acts as a sort of counterbalance to Miles in the whole thing. They've both got loads of moral conviction for opposing ideals that naturally pit them against one another in the film. But it's also clear that neither side is inherently wrong in how they feel, and with Miguel's absolutely heart-disintegrating backstory, it's no wonder he's he's so furious and controlling. You can totally understand how the others are sort of morally pigeonholed into going along with his plans, whether they agree with it or not. And that helps to make the conflict all the more engaging through its moral grayness. At the end of the day, they're not technically the bad guys for keeping balance as they do, but Miles isn't wrong for going against them, and that conflict is fleshed out even further through the side characters, including Gwen, who's been given a much bigger role than she once had in the original, and Hobie, a character I was cautious about after hearing there might be a love triangle between him, Gwen, and Miles, but slowly came to adore as the funniest personality in the whole movie, who, thankfully, isn't in a love triangle at all. I know I said no spoilers, but honestly, how dare anyone assume this guy would ever be uncool enough to get involved in that shit? Hobie don't give a fuck, he would never, and it's best you realize that from the beginning, so nothing holds you back from enjoying all he has to offer, whether it's his personality or his animation. Oh, he looks so good. The varying frame rates of his character, that effect of him constantly having an outline that changes textures from one scene to the next, he's basically the embodiment of a living punk zine. It's gorgeous. And the rest of the movie isn't any different. I wasn't sure how this was going to top into the Spider-Verse in style or scope, but goddamn it does by going balls to the wall knucking futs. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is the prime example of maximalism, with basically no exceptions. Of course, it's got all the regular exceptions you'd expect from a sequel, better lighting, framing, physics, colorization, but that's hardly scratching the surface. The character models, brimming with life. There's not a single one that doesn't pop. The set pieces, vast and detailed. I'm gonna be combing this film for years before I ever find all of the little details they added. The fight scenes? I don't know how they could go any further from here. They've got the best choreography, tracking, and overall energy I've seen from this kind of film in years. The worlds? Each has a totally distinct vibe from the others that fits their respective spider's personality to a T. Gwen's is moody and dreamlike to reflect her melancholic detachment. Pavitter's is vibrant and sketchy, matching his optimistic naivety as a newcomer to the job. There's so much thought put into every detail, I could never do it justice. All you need to do is look at it to know exactly what I'm saying. It's a kind of effort that speaks for itself. This is what 5 years of time dedicated to topping yourself can look like, and it succeeds with flying colors at what it sets out to do. Just the same as the first film before it, right now, there's nothing that matches quite what Spider-Verse is doing. I've never seen a film quite as ambitious, and that's sorta where my criticisms come in. Now, as you may or may not have heard, the movie ends on a cliffhanger, and that is totally fine. The film was originally titled Part 1, and we've since gotten word that a sequel is releasing next year, so that's not a problem. There's nothing wrong with them leaving us waiting for the next installment. What is an issue to me, though, is that once we're hit with that cliffhanger, the feeling it leaves you with is less, I cannot wait for this to keep going, but more of a, wait, that's the end? Really? You see what I'm getting at? It's an ending that keeps you on the edge of your seat, definitely, but also it's incredibly jarring since it's not an organic stopping point. The team very clearly cut it off where they did, not because they wanted to, but from a lack of time to continue with this one ongoing story that'll surely be concluded in Beyond the Spider-Verse. And so it's not totally a film unto itself, it's half a film. I've heard it be compared to The Empire Strikes Back in terms of how great a sequel it is, and I get why, but to give a comparison, the ending of Across the Spider-Verse would be the same as if Empire ended right when Han and the gang got captured by Vader and Luke met Yoda. It's not a satisfying conclusion. Hell, it's not a conclusion at all. You don't get the sense that a story's ended and another's going to start after. We haven't even made it to the climax yet. I suppose that technically the film has Miles being chased by all the spider people, and it is pretty grandiose, but that's obviously not the high point of the entire story. On the timeline, we're still clearly in the rising action phase, so ending it before the highest point narratively is really frustrating, and I understand it so they can tell a much bigger story over the course of 2 films, but honestly, that's not how films are supposed to work. Not to imitate a 90s unradical businessman that doesn't get it or whatever, but there are rules to follow for feature films and continuations to make sure they not only work as a piece in a bigger plot, but as a fully formed story on its own. I shouldn't have to watch Return of the Jedi to see if Luke gets trained by Yoda, which the film had spent its runtime building up to as a key event in Empire story. And another downside of this tactic is that by splitting a single story in two, you're making it so certain plot threads are introduced but never get a resolution in the same film or nearly as much of a spotlight as they should. Like, based on the marketing, I thought Peter and MJ's kid would play a bigger role. I assumed the idea of Jessica Drew and her unborn kid would get some attention. And perhaps both of them will and beyond, but as they are, from the perspective of someone that's only seen Across, we were made aware that they exist and then they vanished from relevance. Same can be said for the main villain of the story, The Spot, who, for the screen time he got, was great, but pretty much disappeared about midway through the film and didn't get nearly enough time devoted to him. I think the best descriptor for this situation is that while Into the Spider-Verse was a regular film that fulfilled all it set up and left room for more without depriving its viewers of a conclusion or stopping point for its current story, Across the Spider-Verse is closer to the feeling of watching half a season of TV, and right as it's getting good, you hear it got put on hiatus for a year due to time constraints. You don't want to stop there, and the showrunners don't want you to stop there either, but there's nothing that can be done, so you're left with a product that's somewhat harder to judge due to being unfinished. I don't want to knock it points for that, seeing as they've got a plan in mind, but the methods they used aren't that typical for the medium they chose to tell the story in, so it leads to some issues as a singular product. I still absolutely adored what the film gave, and I will be waiting with bated breath for Beyond's release, as I'm sure it'll be amazing, but on its own, Across is missing a little something. So for the time being, Into the Spider-Verse is still my number one with a 10 out of 10, and Across is slightly below at a 9.5. Do you agree with my take? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments. I've been Just Stop. You've been spectacular. New big video is on the horizon. Peace outs.